Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to this channel. So a while back a brother sent me a video of a brief discussion at Speaker's Corner on the topic of whether or not we need the hadiths to understand the Quran. Now the proponent, whose name is Adnan Rashid, that's this gentleman here, uses a verse of the Quran to support the idea that yes, we do in fact need the hadiths and the explanations that they contain in order for us to understand the Quran. And one of the jobs of the Prophet ﷺ was to explain and clarify the Quran. So let's listen to the important part of this video, just the first 2 minutes or so, and then I'd like to use it as a springboard for a series of videos that I have in mind to show that, as you can see from the title, the Prophet did not in fact explain the Quran. So let's play the clip.
We have to follow the hadith. And if it doesn't, why are people so adamant about it? That's one of it. Why is it
the Quran clearly says that we have to follow an extra Quranic material in order to understand the Quran.
Okay, and have you got the evidence for that?
Yeah, chapter 16 verse 44. Okay, do you know the Arabic language? Okay, it states, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, wa anzalna ilayka dhikra لِتُبَيَّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. We have revealed the dhikr, the remembrance upon you, so that you may explain to the people what has been revealed upon them. So there, in this verse, Allah is telling the Prophet, we have revealed the dhikr, the remembrance upon you, so that you may explain to the people what has been revealed upon them. This is not the Quran, this is the explanation of the Quran. Okay, a commentary on the Quran, or the sharh or tashri of the Quran. Okay, so this refers to the prophetic tradition, explaining the Quran. Period. It's very clear. There is no escape. People who try to twist it, manipulate it, they cannot do it. Okay, there is no escape. Otherwise, the Quran becomes, in many cases, in chapter 16, Surah 16, verse 44. Okay.
What is that by name? Surah 16.
Nahl, Surah Nahl. The bee. Okay, so the verse is there. It's clearly stating that the Prophet will explain as to what Allah has revealed upon people or for people, which is the Quran. So the question is, where is that explanation? That's the question. It's the hadith. There's no other source.
So you know hadith.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the important part of the clip. From here, the conversation descends, in my opinion, to talking about the actual word hadith and whether or not it appears in the Quran and what it means there, etc., etc., which is an argument and discussion that I don't find to be very fruitful. In any case, as we have just heard, our brother Adnan is very firm in his stance and is saying categorically and in no uncertain terms that that verse 44 from Surah An-Nahl means that the Prophet is supposed to explain and clarify the Quran, and that the explanation and clarification of the Prophet ﷺ is found in the hadiths. Thus, this verse is evidence for accepting and following hadiths. As he says, there is no escape, there is no way out, etc. Now, that is what he was taught, of course, and so that's what he believes, which is understandable. The only thing that I find troubling in what he just said is his accusation that people who don't accept what he says here are trying to manipulate the verse and twist it, which is very unfair. Most of them are just trying to understand this verse in light of the many other verses as best they can. Verses that insist and say repeatedly that the Quran is already clear and its verses are already clear. Anyhow, let's have a look at the verse in question. It's here. If we go to this tab over here, this is the verse in question, and it translates pretty much as Brother Adnan has said. Okay, so وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ. This is the key part that he quotes, and we have sent down to you the remembrance. Some of the translations here say message. لِتُبَيِّنَ, that you may make clear to mankind what was sent down to them. Okay, and you can have a look at some of the other translations here. They all pretty much follow the same line. Now, you will find some of our Qur'anist brothers will insist that the word litubayyina, this word here, is used in the Quran in the sense of making public, proclaiming and reciting, which is true. It is used in the Quran in that way, and it can mean that. But it can equally mean to clarify and explain, and both usages are found in the Quran. So we shouldn't just choose the meaning that suits our beliefs without any just cause. The fact is, both meanings can and do apply, but in both cases I hope to show that this verse does not mean that the Prophet ﷺ is supposed to explain the Quran. I believe that can be shown quite clearly and conclusively using over 10 other verses of the Quran, and inshallah I will do that in an upcoming video. But the purpose of this video and the next 3 is to show by the historical evidence of what has reached us that this verse does not mean what our brother Adnan has said, and that the Prophet ﷺ did not explain nor clarify the already clear Quran. And the reason is as follows. If this verse meant that the Prophet ﷺ was tasked with explaining the Quran to mankind, and that explanation has ended up in the hadith literature, then what would we expect to find in that literature? We would expect to find an abundance of hadith, of authentic hadiths from the Prophet ﷺ himself, not anybody else, from the Prophet himself, and transmitted by many different companions in which he actually explains the Quran. But that is not what we find at all, not by a long shot. Hadiths where the Prophet ﷺ is actually explaining something in the Quran are very, very few. In fact, there are only a handful when you consider that the Quran contains 6,236 verses, I believe it is. Okay. Furthermore, out of those hadiths, only a few can really be called explanations or clarifications, and they are usually about verses that don't need an explanation anyway. Whereas those verses where the dominant Muslim dogmas that we have make it vital that we have hadiths to explain them, for those verses we have nothing. We have no hadiths whatsoever. And the same is true for verses that have caused strife or conflict between Muslims. We don't have any hadiths that resolve the matter. And on top of all of that, many of those hadiths that supposedly explain and clarify the Quran, well, they themselves need explanations and clarifications. That's why we have whole books of explanations of hadith, like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's Fath al-Bari, explaining Sahih al-Bukhari. So some of the hadiths actually need explanations themselves, yet they are supposed to explain the Quran. Or even worse, the hadiths may actually make problems and muddy the waters for verses that are already on their own very, very clear. They are perfectly clear, but you throw in a hadith into the mix and suddenly the verse loses its clarity. So anyway, what I intend to do in the next 3 videos in order to demonstrate this point is to give you a brief overview and show you some examples from the books of hadith and tafsir. Okay, we will look at the chapters of tafsir in both Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari, and then we will look at a classical narrations-based tafsir written by one of the greatest scholars of both hadith and tafsir that we have in our history. And what we will see is this. The conclusion, I will give it to you now in case you don't want to actually follow the next few videos, which might be actually quite boring. What we will find is that the majority of the narrations are either not from the Prophet ﷺ, or they really have nothing whatsoever to do with explaining or clarifying the Quran. And you will also come to see that the rhetoric that we have just heard from from our brother Adnan, and which he has inherited, to be to be fair. It isn't really his rhetoric, so I in no way belittle him for it. But you will see that this rhetoric is just empty pomp and glitter, really. It's part of the embellished words of deception mentioned in the Quran, and that Hassan Farhan al-Maliki spoke of in the last video that I uploaded. Anyway, so that's the end of part 1. I don't want to make these parts too long, but we will look at Sahih Muslim in the next upcoming video, and this is a brief summary of my findings in there. So thank you. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.